George.
It's Red Fence!
It's Red Fence.
Do your homework.
Oh, hello, George.
Hi, Acton. Happy, Holy Saturday?
Yeah, Holy Saturday. Yeah, the
Your
vigils
first-
tonight.
Your first Easter as a non-catechumen?
Catechumen.
Catechumen? Spice rack?
Yes, it was my first anniversary, 1 full year of being Catholic. And we recorded on this day a year ago. I think maybe episode number 3 was recorded on Holy Saturday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Claim to fame.
Yeah.
Updates? 1 year
On
later?
being Catholic?
Yeah.
It's really good, and it's
Good. I'm
complicated.
glad it's complicated. Otherwise, wouldn't you just get bored? I mean,
Exactly. There's no chance of that.
okay. I mean, that would be the worst thing to convert and be like, I'm bored.
There's not much here. No, it's like endless. The possibilities are endless when you're Catholic. So there's so much to read. There's so much to learn. And I love that. But that also means there's a bazillion, like, really great rabbit holes to go down, you know. And so it's almost hard to choose.
It's like the opposite of the internet. Like, endless places
Yes.
to explore, but instead of being just horrible and they're actually rewarding.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, my sponsor told me that when she entered. She was like, it's like a feast to spread out before you, and you're like, oh my gosh, where do I start? Like, or like entering a museum, like when we went to the Met, and there's so many rooms, there's so many beautiful things. How do we narrow it down? Where do I begin? You know, like, well, just pick somewhere and start walking, you know, and start taking it in. So that's kind of
how do you eat an elephant? Like. One bite at a time.
Exactly. How do you be a Catholic? One day at a time.
One day at a time. That's what I do everything. But yeah, no, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been a minute, but we're getting back to, as promised, our second episode on fiction.
That's right. We're going to do The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood.
And somewhat laughingly, but somewhat not laughingly, I called this episode OnlyFans or Afghanistan. Can there be anything in between?
I sure hope so.
So, the book came out in 1985, and I must have read it as a teenager. I don't think I was in college yet, so I must have read it in the 90s. But, you know, the book is asking us to compare, you know, sort of a warped but kind of recognizable feminism of the 1980s with this imagined Christo-fascist dystopia where women, especially fertile women, were controlled and sexually exploited by the ruling theocracy. So, I don't know though, 40 years later, maybe it's just my age, I feel like there's a different lens of comparison, namely between the actual 80s, now, and this imagined dystopia. And in my personal opinion, I don't think the book ages that well in the sense of clutch my pearls, this is such a dystopian thing. That part of it doesn't age well.
Yeah.
I actually think the critique that the book implies of the pre-fundamentalist takeover, like the pre-Gilead, because it's really not the 1980s, and I think a lot of that was so subtle, people missed it. I feel like that part has held up the best. I mean, if some of the things seem almost prescient, right? Yeah. It's this sort of cashless society, and, you know, what better description of the internet can there be than a pornomat?
Yeah.
Like...
That's what we've got.
I mean, she called it. So that sort of subtle beneath the radar part, I feel is really worth investigating. I feel like the subtleties of the book are impressive and worth investigating. But the sort of holier than thou progressivism that is sort of the overt message of the book, I find rather jarring. I mean, she's hitting all the shibboleths so perfectly that, especially towards the end, it hurts, right?
Yeah.
First of all, there's sort of generic blaming fundamentalist Christians for taking away women's rights and how exaggerated it is, like they don't let them read, and making sure we know it was the environmental disasters that caused everything to go pear-shaped. That's a very sort of like, you know, Extinction Rebellion, Just Stop Oil, that kind of like exaggerated self-righteous environmentalism. Making double sure to know that the worst of it was done by and to white people. Did you catch that? How it's like very specific that the birth crisis is like worst among Caucasians.
Oh, I missed that.
And then the Gilead people are also racist.
Yeah.
Because naturally, right? I mean, it seems almost sort of woke avant la lettre that the university of the frame story at the end, like, you know, how many, every 100 years so they are after, is like, implies that the rebuilding of North America was done by indigenous peoples.
Right.
It's all sort of like, I mean, it really fits in with this sort of, you know, neo-racism, I guess we could say, of, you know, of the left. This idea that, like, certain people are always good, other people are always bad. It doesn't matter what they do, it's just who they are. Mm-hmm. This we holy, them evil view of history that, I mean, I'm just so sick of it. It's facile, right? So, but yeah, it's an interesting book because it's, I think if you actually think about it seriously, you can actually get there. You can actually interrogate these things. And, you know, there are really men who are genuinely committed to criminalizing abortion and no-fault divorce everywhere. That exists as a political platform in this country. And it's all public. It's this thing called Project 2025, which is this sort of conservative takeover of America that's predicated on Trump winning. And I don't think either the progressives or these, you know, diehard so-called conservatives represent the 80% of people in the middle.
Correct.
Who just want a policy that is a compromise.
Right. So
the problem, of course, with this self-righteous progressivism now is that the call is coming from inside the house. It's like, with the exception of abortion, the left has basically abandoned the issues that impact women. The definition of sex in law, protections of single-sex spaces, pornography, and prostitution. Yeah. At the time of this taping, we are literally hours away from a new blasphemy law in Scotland. They call it a law against hate speech. It takes effect, I don't know who this joke is on, it takes effect on April Fool's Day. And this is not conservatives passing this law. This is liberals. Like the Scottish National Party is a nationalist liberal party. They're the people who want independence for Scotland, and they're liberals. I mean, they did the whole sort of self-ID disaster. Oh, Google it. Yep. Same party, different day. So it's progressives now who claim speech is violence and literal violence is appropriate anti-colonial resistance. Oh, yeah. That's the whole, you know, campus anti-Semitism thing. Yeah. So it's progressives who claim that men can be women. So this idea that the repression of a place like Gilead is only possible from the so-called religious right is not only inconvincing, at this point it's like insulting. Yeah. So, I mean, talk me down. Okay. Because I'm mad. I don't know. I feel like the Hulu, I watched like a couple episodes of the Hulu adaptation and I was like, this is just like anti-religious trauma porn. I didn't, it felt very like they were making too much about it.
Yeah. I mean, I've gotten all the way through, I'm in, I don't know, season 4 or 5 or something. And I have enjoyed it. Mm-hmm. I think it's really well done. But yeah, it's the conservatives are the bad guys. There's not really you don't see the darker underbelly or the possibility that progressives could do this too, just in their own special terrible way. You know,
right.
Yeah, it makes it seem as if it's unique to conservatism that it could be
or
this
unique
oppressive
to
thing.
Christianity, which is even weirder still, considering how much all of this sort of, you know, we'll get into that later. Like all of this comes from America's, you know, understanding of itself as religious. All of it. Yeah. Left, right, center, all of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Equal opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I agree with you that, you know, repression and authoritarianism isn't limited to the right and that we're currently seeing plenty of it coming from the left. And it'd be possible for folks on the left to read The Handmaid's Tale and like stroke that delicious sense of self-righteousness that can come from imagining your political enemies are horrible people, you know, but you're one of the good ones. But I think a decent counterpoint to The Handmaid's Tale, you know, which shows this conservative religious authoritarianism based on procreation, sexual coercion, technophobia, and the idolization of the family, would be Aldous Huxley's A Brave New World, which shows secular liberal authoritarianism based on technophilia, pleasure-seeking, sexual liberation, and the eradication of the family. You know, because there's more than one way to get people to act the way you want them to act. Like, you can force them at gunpoint, which is kind of Atwood's vision, as well as George Orwell's in 1984. Or you can give them all the commodities, the services, the pleasures, the drugs, the delights and distractions that they want, and then they're just too enervated and brain-numbed and morally weakened to choose or to even desire something virtuous or humane or worthy. You know, so you can get at the oppression just in a different pathway. The pathway that looks happy and fun and you don't know what's happening to you, or through there's a gun to my head, of course I know what's going on. But it's like, that's so obvious. I don't know. To me, it's almost too obvious. I think it's less likely. People aren't dumb. Like they're gonna, if they can take the subtle path along which people will go along with them, of course that's going to happen instead. But I think Atwood is coming from the classical liberal position that democracy is destroyed if we don't protect individual rights. And Gilead is a place that obviously tramples on people's human rights, especially the rights of women. But you can also destroy democracy when the concept of rights is extended ad infinitum, because each right that one person has is everyone else's responsibility. And who's going to enforce that? It's going to be the state, who has the monopoly on violence.
You're speaking from the Thomas Sowell Bible.
Yeah. I haven't even read that, but...
Well, I mean...
That's the thought pattern, like right? Okay. So the troubling patterns you're describing on the left side of the aisle are this rights run amok problem that increasingly calls for state intervention on behalf of ever new rights-bearing groups like men who identify as women and want access to female-only spaces, right? I'm sure there'll be another strange one after that we haven't thought of. It's going to keep happening. I don't know.
I'm going to go live with the Catholics. I'm going to
Come
go
on
live with
over.
the nuns.
And so I think it's fitting, that you as a liberal are the one criticizing your own side for excesses and errors, right? Because that's the only way we can minimize polarization and demonization, if each of us is willing to critique our own side. So I have to do my part and say that there are indeed aspects of The Handmaid's Tale that I recognize as sexist and abusive components of fundamentalist Christianity. And I think those movements are smaller and more isolated than they used to be. Like, I can see why Atwood, was worried about this in the 80s with the moral majority and focus on the family and the 700 Club kind of looming on the horizon. Like, there was this big movement in Ronald Reagan, all these things. So she's not totally fantasizing here. There were, and there still are, small pockets of Christianity that want women barefoot and pregnant in the kitchen, both in Protestant and Catholic settings. But these are very, very tiny minorities, especially now. Like, they're really fringe. Groups like these just drain members like crazy because it's not livable. It's not a good life, especially for women. I have a good friend from childhood who just recently got herself out of this kind of cult-like, it's a sin for women to work outside the home kind of church. So I know that they exist. But there's this great book called Educated by Tara Westover. Have you read that?
I haven't read it, but I remember when it came out and what it's about. It's
fantastic. It describes her escape from an abusive Mormon fundamentalist home. So Christian sects have given Atwood material to work with, especially in light of the appeal of Roe. I can understand, why women are worried and why The Handmaid's Tale is having a resurgence in popularity. But it's important to know.
Yeah, but that Roe is lost. We're all handmaids now. Oh, that just seems so fast.
Yeah,
oh,
yes,
it
is.
irritates me.
And the wearing of the robes
That's
and
what
the
I'm
wings
saying.
and the yeah, there's a real cosplay dimension to it. It's like, come on now. Yeah, facile is the right word for it. It's not well thought out. But it's important to note that the theonomic society that Atwood depicts isn't actually Christian. By her own admission and design, she was not saying that the people of Gilead are Christians.
Well, they're clearly...
but they're meant to resonate on the same frequency. And so it makes people feel or think that it's Christian, even though she's drawing from so many different oppressive things.
The babies that are... The shredders.
I forgot about that.
Purposely... I mean, I think that's Atwood trying to signal to the more intelligent reader that it's a bastardization of Christian.
That's right.
That's
right. Christians would never put a baby in the
good Christians.
Right. Right. There's good and bad versions of everything.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And the corruption of the best is the worst.
Exactly. I think you're right that one of the most poignant and disturbing parts of the book is the description of the technological and social situation just prior to the takeover, right? The disappearance of cash, the pervasiveness of porn, the plummeting birth rate. I mean, that's us right now. Like, you just add in, terrible things we've got that she didn't think of,
imagine.
like ubiquitous surveillance capitalism, the internet, AI, deepfakes. Okay, and there you go. These are troubling times. And so I sometimes feel like we're in the opening pages of a dystopian novel already. Like, someone could write this, what we've got.
Every day. And I feel like if you can only... I feel that, and not only do I feel that, I feel like a very limited number of people I know actually understand that I feel that way. Like, you're not even allowed to sort of sound the alarm because people are just like, oh, you're just crazy.
Yeah.
Right?
You're not crazy.
Thank you. So you end up sort of living in this sort of weird state where you feel like the world is ending, but then again, day after day, you just go on as if.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what people in South Korea are doing. They all know that the birth rate is so bad. That's like, I don't know, 2 or 3 great-grandchildren for every 100 grandparents. Like,
right.
it's like absolutely catastrophic, but everyone's going on their way as if
the cliff isn't coming.
Yeah. I mean, it's what polishing the brass on the Titanic, right? It's that kind of, what else can you do? It's going down. You know what?
Well,
I don't know.
They could just reverse their stance on immigration. I mean, it's not like there's not people.
That's true. Yeah. So before we get into some quotes and our responses to them, I thought we should give a little bit of the gist of The Handmaid's Tale in case you haven't done your homework.
You're the nice teacher. Do your homework!
Or in case you read it such a long time ago that you've forgotten, which is always your problem. You're like, I read this 5 times and I forget about it.
We read it like a couple months ago.
Okay. So this is a dystopian novel set in the near future of New England, which is meant to give us echoes of the Puritans, I think, in a patriarchal, totalitarian state called the Republic of Gilead, which structures its laws around a bizarre, literalistic misapplication of the Old Testament. So it's not Christian, and Atwood was pretty explicit about that, but it borrows language and practices from the Bible in a very kind of modern pastiche kind of way. And Gilead was founded when a violent extremist religious group called the Sons of Jacob wiped out Congress and the president in a single day, declared martial law, kicked women out of public life, and took over. And Gilead's primary reason for being is responding to the fertility crisis and population collapse that was triggered by environmental pollution and venereal disease. Because this was written around the time of the AIDS crisis too, and people didn't really know what was the long-term effects of AIDS or whatever. And so I think she had a bit of that in mind too, like, oh, people's sexual libertinism is part of what's contributing to the problem. So they placed the few fertile women left into the homes of infertile leadership as handmaids who are to provide surrogacy services. So the narrator of the story and the main character is a handmaid known only as Offred, named after the commander Fred, whose home she's posted in. She's of Fred. And the tale is a mix of present-day happenings that Offred describes, intermingled with memories from before Gilead, like of her childhood and college experiences of her husband and daughter, whom she's now separated from, and sometimes also like her imaginings and fantasies. So there's a continual comparison going on in Offred's mind between this brutal faux Puritan cosplay laced with machine guns and the pre-Gilead, normal liberal capitalist society with human rights and all the problems and blessings that our current culture faces. So the past definitely gets romanticized a bit in her telling. A lot of Offred's day-to-day life is highly circumscribed and limited to interacting with other handmaids, with the commander's wife, who's basically like a slave master in the house.
She's definitely ideologically committed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, very much a fanatic. And then Aunt Lydia, who's the woman in charge of training the handmaids and who functions kind of like a capo in a concentration camp. Like, she's not free, but she passes that on to her girls. She's very abusive and manipulative. So this new society, which is, pretending to be traditional, actually destroys natural female solidarity and turns women against each other, which is not traditional. But
it reflects that sort of bias towards, like, liberal equals, you can't have conservative values because women never like it. That is interesting the way you put that, because solidarity was sort of when feminism used solidarity, it meant solidarity of all women to do whatever the hell they wanted.
Yeah, which is not a traditional female solidarity.
No, exactly. But that must be one of the clues that we're supposed to pick up if we're reading critically.
Yes.
That it's not. It's actually like a kind of pseudo Christianity or kind of ballgazed like.
Yeah, but this is not good. They're not going back to the past. They're inventing something new. Right. But again, it's like cosplay. It's like they're playing weird Puritan. They're not really going back. They're just as modern as everybody else.
My favorite homage to that is the butcher named All Flesh.
Yeah.
I love that bit.
All Flesh, yeah.
I was actually listening to the Messiah this morning because it's an Easter oratorium, which people ignore. Yeah. Well, it makes a lot more sense to listen to this time of the year than it does at Christmas. Mm-hmm. So it really embodies that
all flesh
transition, right? All flesh shall see together. To name your butcher that is just sort of dumb, but like in a kind of like, she's having a go at us. Like, yes. It's so funny. Yeah. But if you don't get the references, it's not necessarily funny.
Right. You're gonna be like, what's with that? Yeah, it is quite funny. It's like the people of Gilead named it without really knowing. Sort of like the joke's on them, almost in a way.
Right, and how this sort of it's a joke on the idea that if you're too literal with your Christianity, you are going to come up with very odd takes on both extremes. Like,
yes.
From fanaticism to, anathemism, to sort of saying, like, oh, religion's bad, like...
Right. Yeah, literalism
flesh.
is bad wherever it shows up, yeah.
All flesh the butcher. You could write a paper on that, on, like, what that implies about the body in the book because this is all about bodies, right? It's all about female bodies, this book. Okay, so we've got 3 questions we're going to ask in terms of this book. What is real? What is freedom, I think? Is that the next one?
Yep, what is freedom?
And then, or is it the last one?
That's the second one.
That's the second one. What's the last one then?
What is desire?
What is desire? And then for a bonus one, we could ask, what is evil?
Ooh.
Yeah, because we were talking about that this morning.
Yeah.
This first quote. So this is a quote where Offred is combining a memory from the before times with her experience at the Rachel and Leah Re-Education Center.
Yeah.
Where the handmaids are, housed and taught before they get assigned.
Yeah.
What it reminded me of was geography classes at my own high school thousands of years before, where they showed movies of the rest of the world. Women in long skirts or cheap printed cotton dresses, carrying bundles of sticks with babies slung on them in shawls or net slings. These movies made me feel sleepy, even when men came onto the screen, with naked muscles, hacking away at hard dirt with primitive hoes and shovels, hauling rocks. I preferred movies with dancing in them, singing, ceremonial masks, carved artifacts for making music, feathers, brass buttons, conch shells, drums. I liked watching these people when they were happy, not when they were miserable, starving, emaciated, straining themselves to death over some simple thing, the digging of a well, the irrigation of land, problems the civilized nations had long ago solved. I thought someone should just give them the technology and let them get on with it. Aunt Lydia didn't show these kinds of movies. Sometimes the movie she showed would be an old porno film from the 70s or 80s. Women kneeling, sucking penises or guns, women tied up or chained or with dog collars around their necks, women hanging from trees or upside down, naked, with their legs held apart, women being raped, beaten up, killed. Once we had to watch a woman being slowly cut to pieces, her fingers and breasts snipped off with garden shears, her stomach slit open and her intestines pulled out. Consider the alternative, said Aunt Lydia. You see what things used to be like? That was what they thought of women then. Her voice trembled with indignation. Moira said later that it wasn't real. It was done with models, but it was hard to tell.
Whew. So what's so interesting in this quote is that you've got this contrast between the pre-industrial world of subsistence culture, what Ivan Illich calls the reign of vernacular gender, where men and women have different worlds, different tasks, different tools, all of which are complementary, and the modern world of economic sex that creates and consumes porn in a way that was completely unknown to and impossible within the ancient world. They may have drawn erotic pictures on the wall in ancient Rome, but they didn't have photographs and video, which involves real women really doing things and being done to. So you've got the contrast between the two kinds of videos, but what's just as interesting is the way that these videos were used as a way to distinguish the present from the past and us from them. Right, so back in Offred's geography class, those kids watched videos of gendered subsistence cultures and they got the clear message that we aren't like them anymore. Mm-hmm. We're civilized and not superstitious. We have modern technology to make life easier and safer. We have better commodities. We have more options. Right, but at the same time, Offred recognizes that those other cultures have something which our culture lacks. The ceremonies, the handmade artifacts, the singing, the communal dancing, and the celebration. And the modern industrialized world lacks those good things precisely because capitalism's urban monoculture destroyed them in the name of progress. Right? It was a trade-off. And the perverted 70s porno films, which Aunt Lydia shows to the handmaids, reinforce this new and supposedly pure present from the violent, degraded past. We aren't like them anymore. We're civilized and not perverted. We got rid of the technologies that corrupted us so that life is simpler and women are safer. We may have fewer commodities and fewer options now, but we get to have a transcendent purpose of creating new life instead of being treated like dirty whores. It's this new trade-off. The handmaids are basically sexually enslaved surrogates who have to submit to a monthly sexual act, the ceremony, involving both a commander and his wife, so that these infertile power couples can hopefully have a baby to call their own, and which the handmaid is permanently separated from after weaning. But the handmaids aren't being abused like those women in the porno films, supposedly. And Aunt Lydia is always telling her girls that they should be thankful, which is always so gross to me. And in both of these video viewings, I get the sense that What matters isn't education or curiosity or reality. It's solidifying the narrative that the present is better than the past. Consider the alternatives. You see what things used to be like. That was what they thought of women then. I mean, those lines of Aunt Lydia's, you could put them in the mouth of any liberal feminist looking at history and feeling angry about the patriarchy, right?
True.
That's what they thought of women then, right? So this question of what is real is a difficult one because whoever is in charge of telling the story is motivated to say that today is better than yesterday, right? And this means that the people of Gilead are just as utopian and therefore just as American as the morally loose liberal Americans they displaced. It's still the same Puritan ideal of progress, this onward and upward, just with a different set of values in place. But to address Moira's dismissal of the porn as not real, I can only respond by quoting the formidable Andrea Dworkin, whom we discussed a few months ago. And this is what she wrote. The force depicted in pornography is objective and real because force is so used against women. The debasing of women depicted in pornography and intrinsic to it is real, and that women are so debased. The uses of women depicted in pornography are objective and real because women are so used. The women used in pornography are used in pornography. So when it comes to porn, there is no such thing as acting. All porn is always real, and that's why it's always evil.
Indeed. I mean, it is actually kind of unbelievable, isn't it? Almost how this narrative of progress and what I call its handmaiden liberation can be maintained no matter how glaring the continuity of human failures and shortcomings are.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if I've told you this before, but my mother and father were both social workers when they met. My mother told me once that as part of her master's, her MSW, the class had to watch pornography. This is the mid 70s. I asked my mom. She said she got her degree in 76, and so this is an era though, where pornography was still viewed, at least by some, as a sign of odd cultural progress, like a shedding of the repressive, uptight restraints that at least certain people believed marked traditional American culture and was sort of stagnating. Was this sort of brewing up from the 60s, right? So Deep Throat, which is a landmark pornographic film, and I'm sure you probably don't know what it's about, but
I don't.
I will just trust me. This landmark pornographic film came out in theaters in 1972. In the early 70s, porn was you watched it in theater, yeah. Yeah. The point of this exercise, my mother explained, was that social workers had to be able to tolerate a wide variety of lifestyles and behaviors among their clients. And it was believed, I guess, that exposing yourself to graphic, but I doubt violent, sexual films was one way to do this, to expose yourself to some things that a normal, in the mathematical sense, person would not have previously encountered. Because, I mean, this would have been, it just wasn't something that you would have encountered growing up. Right. I mean, my mother was born in 1950, so, I mean, it's nothing, no one in that generation, it would be very unlikely. Yeah. So I don't even recall being particularly weirded out by this story when my mother told me as a young adult, which I think reflects how differently porn was situated in the culture at that time. So it was this arc, right? In the early 70s, there was this sort of naivety about it, as if it really did not dawn on anyone, save the Dworkin types, that they were standing at the top of a very slippery slope. But, of course, by the time my mother tells me the story, some correction has already been made. There was a porno theater, a XXX theater, in a neighborhood nearish to my house, but it had long been closed. Okay. And it sat closed without being anything else for a long time, and then it became something else eventually. It was as if everybody had come to their senses and, just sort of moved on. Yeah. But actually, really, that was the result of a lot of activism of women campaigning to shut all these theaters down. Yes. And so why am I telling you this? Because I think that this scene, what Atwood is doing is purposely amplifying the violence in this porn film. Yes, I'm sure there was some hardcore rape porn during this period, but this description is of an actual snuff film, a film in which someone is murdered, right? A woman is murdered in this case, obviously. Porn is exploitation and should be criminal, in my opinion, but murder is criminal, even without changing any laws against pornography, right? So the reader is provoked to ask herself, what does Atwood mean by this contrast between these extremes? There are naked men in both these these film contexts. Yes. But in the former, the men are engaged in eking out a living from the earth, and in the latter, men are sexually terrorizing and murdering a woman. Yeah. Offred is in this position of non-comprehension of both narratives, right? Yeah. The pre-industrial society seems somehow pointless to her. She has no frame of reference for the necessity or the purpose of strong men. Right. But the pornography, that violence, it is as if she views that too as a foreign culture. as if she knew about the pornomats. But she had no idea what was really in them. Did she assume the best? Did she just put it out of her mind because she could afford to? Isn't it weird that her reaction is incredulity, not disgust or horror?
Right.
As if porn was everywhere, but also not there in terms of its impact on a woman like Offred. This is literally how I think you and I operate. Because we're older married women whose husbands just don't go there. So we know it's out there, but it doesn't affect our lives in a super direct sense.
Right.
Honestly, it's a brilliant passage, this passage, because it forces the reader into this position where we simultaneously feel sorry for her lack of freedom, right, in Gilead. Yeah. But we also have to confront her rather limited idea, an elite idea, we might say these days, like a luxury belief kind of attitude about what freedom is in her pre-Gilead world. Right, Christo-fascism aside, Aunt Lydia is taking the radical feminist stance on porn here. Yeah, women are not free, period, while men are doing this to women. Yeah. Like, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but it's just ironic because the way that Gilead is set up, the women still aren't free. Like, forced sex, degrading sex is still happening.
Two wrongs don't make a right.
Exactly. It's not like, you know, the thing that Lydia is supporting is now better.
Well,
I mean, in the sense that if the women aren't being killed, but like, I mean, at least as you see, and Atwood helped with the continuation of the series, the TV show. And as the TV show goes on, you definitely see this really dark underbelly of, you know, abuse and even murder and horrible things happening to handmaids. Like, they really are like slaves in the houses. It's not cushy at all.
And so are the women in these porn films.
Yes.
I mean...
Yeah. So it's like, in a sense, it's almost like, what do you call it? It's porn under another name. It's not being recorded, but you definitely get the sense from the show that like the commanders kind of like the kinkiness of, oh, it's so Puritan, but like behind the scenes we get to be kinky. Like they kind, it's almost like a fetish of like deflowering the virgin, or like by having this sort of high purity standard and then defiling it. That's like a turn on for the commanders.
That just seems like very, very typical American porn motifs.
Oh yeah, it is. Honest. It is. It really just seemed like, oh my gosh, is Gilead just one big fetish?
Right.
You know?
Which is not really the way it's presented in the book. At least not from. Right, which makes sense though, because that is what liberals would do to it. They would say, they would reduce everyone to the same level. They would say, "Oh, we might as well have women liberation and porn because that's what you men want anyway." Because even the ones who claim they're virtuous still want that. Huh? That's the. Yeah. That's that.
That's interesting.
But yeah, no, I'm not trying to defend Gilead so much as just say that like it's easy to say that sex work is work if you never have to do sex work, right? Yeah. A lot easier. Anyway, what is freedom? Yeah, take it away.
All right, so this is Offred's memory of a moment pre-Gilead when the people who were about to take over began to change laws to restrict women's roles, like preventing women from holding jobs outside the home and having credit cards. So this is before the big thing happens, but they're kind of setting the stage for the takeover. And it mentions Luke, who is her husband. Luke knelt beside me and put his arms around me. I heard, he said, on the car radio driving home, "Don't worry, I'm sure it's temporary." "Did they say why?" I said. He didn't answer that. "We'll get through it," he said, hugging me. "You don't know what it's like," I said. "I feel as if somebody cut off my feet." I wasn't crying. Also, I couldn't put my arms around him. "It's only a job," he said, trying to soothe me. "I guess you get all my money," I said, "and I'm not even dead." I was trying for a joke, but it came out sounding macabre. "Hush," he said. He was still kneeling on the floor. "You know I'll always take care of you." I thought, already he's starting to patronize me. Then I thought, already you're starting to get paranoid.
So this passage, maybe better than any other, captures this connection that Atwood and Offred, her spokeswoman, I guess, protagonist, makes between working in the capitalist economy and being free. I mean, this is such a big deal, right? Like, I mean, obviously, the whole handmaiden thing is, like, the next level dystopian weirdness. But, like, you know, right? This is the Afghanistan of the title, right? Without the ability to earn your own living, feminism has argued for at least a century now, women are not free. Which is, of course, when looked at from an Illichian perspective, entirely backwards. Yeah. Why does anyone have to exchange their time labor for services in order to survive when that never used to be the case?
Right.
I mean, obviously most humans had to work in the sense of labor to survive, but this work was not part of a modern economy where if you didn't have a job, you starved. Indeed, the transition period in Europe towards this sort of economy, where there was no longer a de facto common access to the materials of subsistence, land to grow, forage, glean, or hunt, this period was incredibly difficult and full of, in fact, starvation, vagabondage, and destitution.
Yes.
It was a shit show, to use a modern podcasting term, But it has passed so far out of living memory that we now think of it as normal, that the only possible ways to live are through capital rents, labor, or charity. Right. Just as speaking of subsistence living no longer implies autonomy of security, it actually implies pre-technological poverty, like in that film, that previous quote, right? In the same way, speaking of female dependence, like a woman on her husband or extended family, now implies subservience and exploitation. Yeah. But these are completely new connotations, right? I really think that we're about to hit the wall on this. I think feminism needs to confront the idea that an economic system that ignores, breaks, and ultimately destroys gender is itself the problem. The problem, and this problem, no amount of rulemaking or affirmative action or pipeline plummeting can ever resolve. The market knows only competition. And so it can only function by putting men and women into a competitive relationship. Feminists looked at the negative results of this competition and cried foul, rightly. Yeah. But they didn't really identify the correct cause. They believed that the problem was that women were treated differently than men, when in fact the problem was that the regime of sex, that's Elish's term, was inclined to treat men and women as the same. Yes. Both exploitable.
Exactly.
So, but this real problem remained invisible to the extent that elite women, and these are the women who had the brains and the time to be these activists in the general, right? Elite women were focusing on this pseudo problem of privilege. It was unfair that women shouldn't be lawyers and doctors and professors and politicians, and it was. It was not based on anything other than the desire of men to keep women away from domains that they fancied for themselves. Did I mention competition? Yeah. And so women fought to be accepted into the professions, and they won. Indeed, once the stuffy old guard died off, the rising generation of capitalists surely realized that doubling the labor force was great for productivity. Yeah. So in some sense, it was a bit inevitable that this pervasive kind of sexism would almost entirely die off. But I think it's a kind of luxury belief to argue that the best way toward female happiness is to never depend on a man, but rather to trade your labor for money. This is something people with exciting and highly remunerative careers would say. Right. Ignoring the fact that most people have jobs. There's a difference between saying you can be independent and go earn your own living. You don't have to marry or be dependent on a man. That's one thing to say, you have that option. That's great. But our society says, no, like, you're not emancipated, you're not feminist, you're not a full person unless you earn your own money. And that's crazy because, I mean, like, children don't earn their own money. What are they, like, half people?
Right. And once you're retired, you're not earning money.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, exactly. It's a very sort of, like...
It's very myopic.
Like, who does that idea benefit the most? People who employ people and people who sell shit to people. Yeah. That's who that idea benefits the most. Yes. Cui bono. So feminism really needs to come to terms with the fact that this glamorization of paid labor is no less ideologically driven than, say, the Taliban's prohibition of women working outside the home. Obviously, the latter strikes us as cruel and backwards. Right. But insisting that there's no value to be had for women, especially mothers, in cultivating interdependence, that is, supporting families, that's just as ideological. I think it's just as wrong-headed. I think it's just as incorrect. In the case of Afghanistan, we see how their economy is sacrificed to this prejudice. I mean, especially after 20 years of American intervention, they have like this huge cohort of women who grew up without the Taliban, who were educated and like were working in all sorts of sectors, right? So it's a disaster for them. But in the case of the West, sure, our economy thrives, but society itself, that web of interdependent relationships not connected to the economy, withers away. Yes. But this is why it's so interesting to read this book all these decades later, because we have now the benefit of hindsight to see that what feminists really thought was the solution to sexism turned out to have some serious trade-offs. Namely, in an environment where fewer and fewer children are raised by both parents, and in the early years, looked after by their mothers.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's such an important and I would add like deeply ironic and inverted idea that Edwards is expressing, that freedom is a result of working in a capitalist economy, that freedom is the end result of wage labor, such that losing a job is equivalent to having your feet cut off. Right? Like, just like you're describing, George, like this is the opposite of how European peasants felt as the medieval period was ending. Like the vast majority of peasants lived a subsistence life, which did not mean subservience and poverty. It meant a life of skilled self-provisioning, or rather self-in-community provisioning, within a framework of gender in which men and women productively worked side by side, in a division of labor in which they were mutually dependent on each other, as opposed to unilateral dependency. Mm-hmm. So subsistence meant that wealth wasn't equivalent to money. Wealth was having skills. Wealth was having an interdependent network of families and neighbors. Wealth was having access to land for growing food, hunting, and fishing. There was a time when wage labor was considered by most people to be a form of slavery. Like, it's what a person did if they had no wealth. And there's, like you're saying, there's this brutal, bloody story. There's a shit show behind that centuries-long transition from the world of cooperative gendered self-provisioning to a world of universal wage labor, which is also a world of universal dependence on commodities, and the nigh-universal loss of the capacity to self-provision. Like, other than Wendell Berry and the Amish, like, nobody knows how to do this anymore.
And
I don't.
The Amish get normal Western healthcare. They
That's
just
true.
Pay for it without insurance.
That's true. And this is a scary thought, because when the world's population collapses, which it's on track to do, that will cause innovation to collapse. I was just listening to this on Louise Perry's podcast, most recent podcast. So that barring some AI singularity changing everything drastically and suddenly, our lives are actually going to get a lot more simple and a lot more local for a few centuries.
But we eat oil. I mean, if you ever watched any of those farming videos online, this will blow your mind. Like how mechanized and large-scale farming is with these huge machines. We eat oil in the sense that, like, none of that can function without fuel
oil
for the machines.
Oh, wow.
None of it.
I did not know that.
So, like,
wow, I mean,
like,
so...
If it gets too simple and too local, we will all starve.
Okay.
Because, I mean, food is made on, like, you cannot believe these machines. I watched one about peanut farming the other day. They have special machines for every crop.
Oh,
like, they do different things to the it's crazy. It blows your mind.
Wow, it's so specialized and it's so globalized. When there aren't enough people to, like, make the things and extract the things and ship the things, we're going to have to get to know our neighbors again, because it's going to be different.
I don't know what we're going to eat, man. If there's like a special machine for peanuts.
Yeah.
Once that goes away,
yeah,
there's going to be no peanuts.
What will we do without peanuts?
Just as an example.
But yes, yeah. We all ought to be very interested in learning how to self-provision. We have to rediscover vernacular gender, because subsistence only works within cooperative gendered worlds. That's the thing. Like,
right.
If we're heading back towards subsistence or something like it, if that's in our future, then we have to rediscover vernacular gender, because those things are bound together.
Gender was the culturally evolved mechanism by which this very difficult work of subsistence...
Yes.
Or not difficult, but demanding, complicated, intricate work can be done successfully.
Right. Like, for subsistence to succeed, you need that gendered world.
I mean, you're not going to be, like, checking your diversity point boxes in your application to be the person who does the laundry.
Like, men's muscles will start to matter again. And things are going to get interesting.
We want a diverse team to sow this crop. I mean, can you just imagine? Because when you put it like that, it seems like it reveals it to be the ridiculousness it is. Yeah.
So I want to rewrite that quote in which Offred is remembering losing her job and becoming paranoid about dependency on her husband.
I love it when you do rewrite.
So I'm going to rephrase it to show that this feeling of a woman becoming dependent on a man for money is actually just a continuation of what it was like for peasant men who basically had their feet cut off by capitalists.
Ooh, this is brilliant. I love it.
So there was a period in European history when the commons were destroyed through land enclosure and privatization, through brutally restrictive game laws, like think Robin Hood, through laws that forbade people from working in their own backyard gardens on the Sabbath, through criminalization of poverty and vagrancy, anything to prevent people from being able to subsist on their own and freely provision themselves and their families and communities. Those things became a target for capitalists. So they wanted everyone to be dependent on them for a wage. So here's Atwood 2.0.
Oh, this is going to be good.
My boss handed me a paycheck Don't worry. You'll get used to it, he said, slapping me on the back. You used to fritter away all your time fishing, sauntering slowly after your cattle, getting drunk on saints' feast days. But now you can be really productive and responsible. Become a decent Christian instead of a lazy-ass Catholic and earn some cash. You don't know what it's like, I said. I feel as if somebody cut off my feet and my hands. I wasn't crying. I was pissed. It's only some farmland and some woods, he said, trying to soothe me. I guess you get all my land, I said, and I'm not even dead. I was trying for a joke, but it came out sounding macabre. Hush, he said. You know I'll always take care of you. I thought, already he's starting to patronize me. And then, almost as an afterthought, he said, just remember, if you quit, you starve. And so will your wife and kids.
That's excellent.
So with the actual
Especially
quote,
with the word patronize in there.
Yeah, I know, right? We'll take
he
care
is our
of you.
patron.
Yeah, right. Literally, totally dependent. And so what the actual quote and my reboot here convey is that the problem is unilateral dependence when one group has all the means and the other group is totally at their mercy. Like it's coercion that destroys cooperation. So what the capitalist money economy did to all the self-provisioning families was to make them unfree and dependent on the man's wage labor, with crummy wages, usually, to survive, while his wife's labor remained unmonetized and thus became invisible and unvalued shadow work. So the supposed solution to this wage enslavement and to shadow work was to include women in the pool of those who are also totally at the mercy of employers.
And that happened really early. I mean, women were... women and children were seen as...
That's right.
I don't understand that mechanism, how, immediately upon the creation of these industrial wages, women could always make less and they were more in demand for that reason.
Yeah.
It seems like those two things can't both be true. They both
But it was.
it happened that
That's
way.
right. Yeah, and the children too. But you can see how the supposed solution isn't really a solution once it's taken away. Which is what happens in the pre-Gilead takeover days, which Offord is recounting. Like, when the government takes away women's capacity to be employed and earn money, the point is that both she and her husband are slaves, right? The unilateral dependence that she now feels on him is exactly the same as the unilateral dependence he has always felt on his employer.
And that's the part feminism erases.
Right,
yeah.
right. Both of them have their feet cut off. It's just that now she's aware of that again, whereas her husband doesn't realize he's not free. Right? Because we've forgotten the past.
Well, and the women are making it sound like feminism say, oh, you have to, I want in too. It, contributes to that narrative of, that is what freedom is.
Right.
Contributes to it.
Yeah. And just to clarify, in case anybody's getting worried, no, I am not a Marxist. I'm a Catholic. And that means I find, Marx's analysis of the problems of capitalism pretty compelling, even while I find his solutions to be both horrifyingly evil and stupid. But the point of critiquing industrial capitalism, or economic sex, in Illich's words, isn't to give props to Marx. It's to prevent us from buying into simplistic ideas, like the idea that women's market participation, aka wage labor, is equivalent to women's liberation. I mean, I guess having the same master as a man, makes you sort of equal to a man, but that's not freedom. That's not flourishing. That kind of equality seems like a Pyrrhic victory to me. It's like, win the battle, lose the war. Great, you have the same master as your man. You feel better? No.
Yeah, no, it's a conundrum. I mean, feminism seems really stuck on that. Really stuck on that.
Yeah. But I think the next phase is to ask, what is after this kind of feminism that's so, let us into the market? What comes after that? What does it look like when women realize that's not really the solution?
I don't know. I mean, all the liberal side just seems to be make the state pay for everything.
That is so not a solution to anything.
Right, but it's if children are poor because women who are working are raising them, then we have to give them money so that they're not so poor. Which on the one hand, you can argue that there's a place for charity, but wait a sec. Now we just think that we literally have gotten to the point socially where we think literally only one person makes the baby. That is the understanding of biology behind the social acceptance of single motherhood, is that only one person made the baby. Mm-hmm. That's the woman.
Yeah. The
left is all into that on the economic side, and the right is all into that on the anti-abortion side, because they also believe that only one person made the baby. Right?
Yeah.
Because they're trying to control what women do. It's control what men do.
Yeah.
Try that on.
Yeah, but to do that, you can't, we get stuck this way because of individualism. But
when you look at
men
don't want to do hard things.
Right. Yes.
get jobs they hate to take care of their children because they made them.
Right. But it's like you can't have this myopic narrow, we just look at an individual. Because you see, like, men and women's bodies are so different. They're made for one another for making more people. And so there's a sense in which the male-female divide exists as a unit. So there's no such thing as a baby without this communal thing, which is like a family, whether it calls itself a family or not. Mm-hmm. Sex makes families. That's what it is. And so you have to see the holistic thing and be like, if there's a problem, we have to work on the whole thing, which of course involves men. Yeah. But it's only individualism that makes us think, well, we're just looking at the woman here and the thing inside her body. Right. It's like, no.
At the child. Yeah,
you have to look at the whole family.
Right.
You have to look broader. Yeah. Speaking of sex and families, what is desire?
Okay. So what do we make of the fact that the novel is really only an implied horror story? This is what you're talking about with the series, how they draw this out. But like in the book, it's pretty mild, right?
Yeah.
Offred's relationships, while ostensibly examples of this dystopian, Christofascism, are not violent or sadistic. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's kind of a veil over what she actually even feels in her encounter with Nick. Like the setup is that Nick is the driver and he's also, I guess we're supposed to infer that he and the commander are part of like the resistance in some way, or at least he is.
I think Nick is, but the commander's not.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Because Nick ultimately gets Offred away.
Yes, he gets her out.
But the plan is that, he's potentially more virile, whatever the word is.
Yeah.
And so they're going to have sex so that she can get pregnant because that's the whole goal. Because she's clearly not getting pregnant
from the commander.
Yeah. It's not so far. Mm-hmm. And this is in the best interest of everyone. So, actually, it's the commander's wife, right? Oh, yes. Yeah. It's the commander's wife who suspects her husband is infertile. So she sends the handmaiden to have sex with Nick.
Right.
Offred to have sex with Nick in the hope that, she'll conceive. So this scene is really weird because it goes through these sort of iterations. Pretty much, generally, Offred has been like what we call, in lit crit speak, a reliable narrator. Uh-huh. And in this passage, we get this like these two sort of beg-offs where she's like she has a version and she's like, no, it didn't happen like that, and then she does it again. So there's two fictions and then the resolution. So here's the first fiction of this encounter. Mm-hmm. No preliminaries. He knows why I'm here. He doesn't even say anything. Why fool around? It's an assignment. He's undoing my dress, a man made of darkness. I can't see his face, and I can hardly breathe, hardly stand, and I'm not standing. His mouth is on me, his hands. I can't wait, and he's moving. Already, love, it's been so long. I'm alive in my skin again, arms around him, falling in water softly everywhere, never ending. I knew it might only be once. And the second fiction, so then she says, no, it actually didn't happen like that. And there's the second one, which also she begs off. He says nothing, just looks at me, unsmiling. It would be better, more friendly, if he would touch me. Let's be practical. I don't have much time, I say. This is awkward and clumsy. It isn't what I mean. I could just squirt it into a bottle and you could pour it in, he says. He doesn't smile. There's no need to be brutal, I say. Possibly he feels used. Possibly he wants something from me, some emotion, some acknowledgement that he too is human, is more than a seed pod. I know it's hard for you, I try. He shrugs. I get paid, he says, punk surliness, but still makes no move. I get paid, you get laid, I rhyme in my head. So that's how we're going to do it. We're going to be tough. You come here often? And what's a nice girl like me doing in a spot like this, I reply. We both smile. This is better. We're quoting from late movies, from the time before. And the movies then were from a time before that. This sort of talk dates back to an era well before our own. Not even my own mother talked like that, not when I knew her. Possibly nobody ever talked like that in real life. It was all a fabrication from the beginning. Still, it's amazing how easily it comes back to my mind, this corny and falsely gay sexual banter. I can now see what it's for, what it was always for, to keep the core of yourself out of reach, enclosed, protected. So then she admits it didn't happen that way either, and this is what the final thing she has to say about it. I'm not sure how it happened, not exactly. All I can hope for is a reconstruction. The way love feels is always only approximate. Partway through, I thought about Serena Joy sitting down there in the kitchen, thinking, cheap. They'll spread their legs for anyone. All you need to give them is a cigarette. And I thought afterwards, this is a betrayal. Not the thing itself, but my own response. If I knew for certain he's dead, would that make a difference? I would like to be without shame. I would like to be shameless. I would like to be ignorant. Then I would not know how ignorant I was. So I'm not sure whether Atwood intended the scene to be read this way, but I think it's a great representation of the modern world's overlay of sexual values that has resulted in total confusion. The first fiction is right out of the gate a total bodice ripper, right? Where the woman is not at all impacted by the fact that the man she's going to have sex with is a stranger. It's 0 to 60 in 10 seconds and it feels good. Yeah. It's like, that is the standard bodice ripper narrative, right? Yeah. The second scene is an attempt to fall back on the culture of chivalry. But of course, the underlying premises of that chivalry are missing. There's no love. Well, I should say there's no courtship. There's no marriage commitment. There's no family plans. The formulaic sexual banter was a courtship ritual. It helped both partners determine whether the other person was someone they could trust. Yes. Because how well you know the script, right, was an indicator of whether you could trust them, you know, whether they knew and were willing to obey the sort of agreed upon rules. Yes. The rules that you weren't making up. It was the rules. It was capital R rules. So this third scene, it isn't really a scene at all. It's this collapse into confusion. Like, you know, we've got the bodice ripper and the chivalry, and now we're just like, we're nowhere. Offred feels somehow pulled into the judgmental framework of Gilead. Yeah. She's a whore by the standards of the commander's wife, and even by the standards of her own marriage, an adulteress, right? But remember, the book tells us this, that her relationship with Luke started as adultery. He was married when their relationship started out as an affair. Yeah. So this wish to be without shame feels strange. It doesn't add up. Huh. I wonder if this is a kind of commentary about the confusions of modern female culture, where all of these things exist at once. It's not like the simplistic version is that you overturn one culture and replace it with another, but really what you're doing is layering it, right? They're all still there. The reader is meant to see the premise of Gilead as an incredibly dark, incredibly illiberal. But in the book is more in the shadow of violence than it is a violent book. Right. Offred's predecessor has taken her own life, but Offred seems to take a lot of strength in the fact that she chose to be a handmaiden rather than be sent to the colonies, which is, I guess, where they just send everybody to starve. Yeah. And neither the commander or Nick is presented as either ugly or sadistic. Right. If anything, the relationship she cultivates with these two seem to be based in the values of the pre-existing culture. That's right. They fall back on those, yeah. As if they're all a bit play acting when it comes to this crazy religiosity. That's right. So if anything, the book invites us to view the source of the fanaticism as other women. Yes. Right? From Aunt Lydia to the commander's wife. There's the real... And that is, I think, the worst stab in the... It's not even in the back. It's right in the front. Because it's basically saying that, you know, the reason we need female liberation is because they're incapable of solidarity. I think that's why the book insults me. Oh, so deeply. Say more about that. Yeah, say that again. I want to understand what you mean. Like I was saying before about how the view of men is that they're just depraved no matter what. So, like, it's more honest to have a culture with, like, the pornomat than it is to have a culture like Gilead, because in the end, all they do in Gilead is just call the pornomat something else, right? Okay. Because he takes her to that to Jezebel's, love, right? Yes. Oh, Jezebel's? It's called Jezebel's. Of course. Of course it's called Jezebel! So men are sort of always that way. So you can never win. Like, it's this very low opinion of men. But no virtuous men. Right, no virtuous men. They're all just... But it's even this worse opinion of women, because it implies that while a man in Gilead will just be a hypocrite, a woman turns into some sort of, like, witchy zealot. Yeah. You know how we talk about the sort of, like, meaning-shaped hole, or the God-shaped hole, or the whatever-shaped hole. What we have is, like, a convent-shaped hole. And I don't mean, like... I'm not really saying... I don't really think it's about Catholicism, although I think we have to admit that Catholicism made room for that. Yes. It's about... Maybe we could call it a small C Catholic hole. Our culture was built on female knowledge being cultivated in women-only spaces and domains that they ruled without question. And Illich talks a lot about how, like... The idea of having a man intervene in a birth was like... Oh, gosh. Like, 500 years ago... That'd be anathema. You would have been great. Like, literally, you would have been judged insane. Right. Like, because you did not go there. You cannot cross those lines. You cannot cross those lines. Women really had sovereignty within certain spheres. Yes. Yes. That's why this hurts so much. This dystopian idea that, like, women aren't capable of building something good collectively. Yeah.
That's part of why the stuff at the Rachel and Leah Center with Aunt Lydia and everything, it feels so perverse.
It suggests, like, just like men are all porny, women are all, like
catty, bitchy, controlling.
Right.
Like, leave them to themselves and they're going to do this sick stuff to one another. It's a view of human nature. Whatever spark of the image of God was in people is just totally snuffed out and, like, put them together and they're just going to be awful to one another all the time. It's like there isn't something redeemable about it. But I will say in the show, you know, over the seasons, they really do work with Aunt Lydia's character to where a couple different points you think, oh my gosh, she's going to break. Like, I think she actually really cares about these girls. She feels like responsible for them. There are multiple scenes where, like, she's like kind of self-hating on herself for having been cruel or unkind to them, where she really sees their humanity, but she's so fanatical that she'll, like, then slip back into the fanaticism mode. But it's almost like the real woman that cares. The maternal part of her, even though she's not a mother, but she's a mother to these women.
Right.
The maternal part of her will at times kind of come out, and she'll, oh gosh, I'm like even getting teary remembering it. There are moments where she will protect them from the men. Or she'll step in and do things for them, and you're like, oh, it's almost there, maybe a little bit. It's not totally dead. You know, you don't really see it in the book, but that the show plays with that more and makes her into more of a real woman.
Right, but this idea that, like, okay, women are just, like, lesser sadists than men contradicts everything we know about actual women.
Yes.
Women are not sadists. That's why this whole idea of, like, in the UK, when these cross-sex fucked up men commit these horrible crimes and the press reports them as women, it's so disturbing because...
Yeah, everybody knows women don't do that.
Right, women don't put cats in blenders. It's not a thing. Like, look at how many fewer women are incarcerated than men, and they're almost all of them are in there for nonviolent offenses. Right. Yeah. It's bullshit to sort of, like, base this kind of dystopia on this, like, I don't know. It doesn't feel good. It feels like that's what the capitalism wants women to think about one another, because then it basically it neuters all their power, because if they come together, then nothing is impossible. Right. It's reinforcing that competition is not inherent to capitalism. It's just the way of all things. It's the way of all flesh. It's competition. They don't want all the flesh to see it together. No. The glory of the Lord shall be revealed. I mean, like... It's a very, like, it's just, yeah, I mean, I think that if you look at any organization, I mean, you can, you know, the sort of trauma speak version of this lingo is women doing all the emotional labor, right? Blah, 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 right? But, like, underneath that, what that really hides, that's sort of just like a way, it's crafty, right? It's a way to get women to sort of denigrate the thing that is actually their power. Yes. That they do hold all those things together through their effort. And, and social skills and social abilities. Right. Bridget Fennessy has this expression on her show Dumpster Fire, where she'll do a segment that's like, patriarchy so crafty. And, like, that's crafty. I mean, like, yeah, like, to get women to, like, resent the very things that are the source of their power. Yes. Yeah. And so to want to divest themselves of it. We're like, why are you sticking this on me? Or when it's actually, don't you realize the amazing capacity you have? Right. And the fact that, you know, if you don't want to, like, problem is that it's a really clever way of dividing people, because then people think, they become precisely against the very thing that would actually empower them. They're like, oh, I'm going to be over here on this side. I'm going to say trans women are women. I think what we talk about on this podcast, and maybe what this book is asking, is what does a healthy culture among women look like? Yeah. Right? That's what we're in the middle of, right? Yes. Like, it's even more important now to know, because women tend to politicize the question. Yeah. But the answer is not going to come from which party is in office and what laws are passed. Yeah. The answer is going to come from what women are willing to prioritize and do with and for one another. Yeah. So, I mean, Gilead is, of course, a failed kind of pseudo-conservatism-ish. I mean, it's more like it's not really even conservatism. It's just fanaticism. Yeah. That's a better way to say it. It's totalitarian fanaticism. Uh-huh. But the pre-Gilead glimpse we get there is actually kind of a little more focused, right? It's a not so pseudo kind of progressivism. It's fairly accurate. I mean, like, it's what we have. Yeah, and I think that the key is that these problems create one another, right? It was the porno mats and a culture of you're free to do whatever feels good that
led to the conditions of mass infertility, environmental degradation, and societal decay.
But
right?
why do liberals get so? Why can people get so agitated about? I don't understand how you can get so upset about, like, the whole Handmaid's thing, right? Was the fall of Roe. It's about this, it's about abortion, it's about choice, right? Mm-hmm. Choice. How can you get so worked up over that and not care one dick shit about porn? Please explain that to me.
I don't know. I mean, because you'd have to look at them both in terms of, I want to do whatever the hell I want. Like, if you use that frame of, like, pure libertarian freedom, then it's, I want to do whatever the hell I want sexually, and then I want to be able to do whatever the hell I want with my body in pregnancy or not. Mm-hmm. It's just that, it's like the freedom to choose whatever.
They don't realize that they've put in the same basket two things that couldn't be more different. Right. Male depravity and female, like, reproductive choice.
Yeah, maternality. Yeah.
Because, like, the effects are not the same.
Right.
Oh,
right.
God.
And this is why you can't have freedom as, like, a fundamental virtue. You can't. Because freedom means, like, anything and everything. Everything can go in that bucket. Right? Like, you have to have, well, the Catholic definition of freedom would be, the freedom to fulfill your nature, to be happy, which means being virtuous, rather than freedom is having absolutely no limits on your choices. So that's why America is such a weird place, because its whole ethos is so fundamentally tied up with the idea of freedom and liberty. But I'm always like, for what? For porn? For abortions and reproductive choices? For religion? For fill in the blank? For whatever you want. It's like, I don't know how that's sustainable in the long term, because it's not a culture.
Right.
It's not.
Well, because it doesn't have a continuity. Because you never know what someone's going to come up with the next day.
Right. And then the people's various freedoms will conflict with one another. And then whose freedom wins?
They definitely.
It's like, and
then
you can't just go with do no harm. It's like, all manner
what's harm?
Right. What's harm? Well, you can't answer harm unless you have, like, what flourishing is, because harm is the opposite. Well, then what's flourishing? What's good? Like, you can't just say, well, freedom, do no harm, without defining what good is. And I feel like we're desperately trying to not do that. Our culture doesn't want to have to define what good is, because then people will feel bad.
Well, and I think there's this hangover from the fact that we kind of thought we were doing that, and then it turned out we had some real significant blind spots.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and because this system can work when you're living off the old fumes of Christendom, but you start to lose enough of that. You lose a common culture of background assumptions of what's good, and we don't even have to talk about it because everybody knows. You lose that eventually, and then freedom starts to look terrible. But you can run the freedom on a cultural matrix where people are pretty much have the same kind of moral values.
Right, because they're just self-regulating.
Exactly. Yeah. And so that's why it worked for so long.
They're not actually relying on the state to do that.
No.
They're doing it themselves.
No. I mean, that's how liberalism got as far as it did, is because it was running off of the old Christendom values. But we don't really have them anymore. And so I don't think liberalism works without, like, a substrate of Christianity to keep everyone with the same base assumptions.
Yeah, no, I mean, clearly, or its mileage is kind of vary, like, depending on, like, what is happening in your hyper local. If it's not happening to you, it's not happening at all. I mean, I feel like it's like the sex work thing. It's like, I mean, it's exactly the same thing. If, like, you're being exploited by your pimp, someone else saying sex work is real work has no relevance. Just like, it's easy to say trans men weren't women if a man isn't, like, replacing your daughter on the sports team.
Right.
Like, it costs you.
Right.
I mean, this is the whole idea of luxury beliefs. Like,
like
until they make sense. You. They make sense until they come to your doorstep, and then they don't make sense anymore.
Yeah. But to go back to the quote.
Yeah, I interrupted.
Oh, no. This is great. Like, I love your breakdown of Offred's fictions, like from the bodice ripper to the chivalrous banter to this desire for shamelessness, right? And then she ends with, I'm not sure how it happened, not exactly. All I can hope for is reconstruction, right? And this admission of hers that she's an unreliable narrator kind of throws the whole book into question. Like, is the entire Handmaid's Tale a reconstruction? Like, how much can we trust her account of things? But it's particularly here in this sexual encounter with Nick that she admits she wants to be both shameless and ignorant. Like, she wants the comfort and the pleasure of these trysts. And I think she does actually fall in love with them as they keep hooking up. And definitely the show continues that. Like, they They have a baby together.
Oh, wow.
They really do fall in love. They kind of like wish they could be a family together, but they can't, you know. She wants these things, but without having to fit those within the moral framework of her conscience. So like, I think that to desire ignorance and shamelessness is to desire to sear your conscience, to like shut your conscience up. And it's ironic to me that Offred wants this when the whole oppressive system of Gilead can only keep running because people have seared their consciences. Right? Like shamelessness, it can look like rampant sexual license, but shamelessness can also look like impregnating a woman against her will and then taking her baby away and calling it your own. That's shameless.
That's surrogacy.
Yeah. I'm getting there. Like there's a fertility cult shamelessness at the heart of Gilead that requires the wives to shut off their disgust and humiliation at sharing their husband's bed with another woman, right? And there's shamelessness in separating mothers from their children, this forced ignorance of how inhumane and cruel that is. So Gilead is the kind of place that destroys conscience. Like anyone with a functioning and sensitive conscience ends up dead, hanging on the wall.
Yeah. Oh, and there's like that first instance, like they're hung for like gender. There's like they call it like
gender crimes or something,
which is so interesting.
Yeah. It's like anyone who can still feel shame is going to have a moral compass. But like you kill the capacity for shame, and a person becomes self-serving and motivated just by appetite, which means that they're controllable from the outside. Right, like dangle all the carrots and sticks.
Right, because then you can just feed their appetite.
Exactly, but a person with a conscience will become a martyr in a totalitarian society because they cannot be bought. But if you sear your conscience, and it's funny because Offred talks about this at different points. She's like, I'm not strong enough, I'm weak, I just want to survive. And she's sort of admitting, like, I just want to get through this, and I can't get through this with a conscience. So she's like, she has to like cut it off somehow so that her body will stay alive. But she's like doing damage to her soul to do that, right?
Yeah. She's saying, I have to endure this moral injury, no matter how grave it feels, because the only other choice besides enduring this moral injury is death.
Right. And so I think that's a really interesting, important thing to raise up when you're faced with horrifying moral injury versus death. Which one are you more willing to do? And the Christian conception of shame, like the glory of shame, is like that part of you that would say, well, I could never do that. I could never do that. So I guess I'm going to die.
Right.
That whatever that thing is, whatever that horrifying thing is, it's unthinkable. Like the good part of shame makes certain acts like unthinkable, so that then the only other option is death. And you're almost like, I'm not like choosing to die. It's just that's not even on the table.
Right.
And so the question, like, how do you become the kind of person, or like as a parent, how do you raise the kind of person that's going to have some unthinkables, right? That's going to have the good kind of shame. And how hard it is to do that in a society that's always nudging us towards shamelessness because it wants us to have controllable appetites.
Ooh, that is a really interesting conundrum. Yeah.
So it's hard because like if you raise a child with a conscience, you will raise a child who will be hurt.
Right, exactly. Who's supposed to like take that feeling as like where the like whiskers on the cat.
Yes.
It's supposed to
exactly
get that sense.
Here's
like,
the edge.
No go. There's the edge. Not safe.
Exactly.
Can't fit through there.
Right. Yeah. And it's like, how do you raise a child in a culture like with the internet influences, all that stuff everywhere? That's everything is aimed at like cutting off the cat's whiskers. Don't feel out where the boundaries are.
That is hard. Yeah. That is really hard.
Yeah. But so to come back around to the scenario of this quote where the commander and his wife are going to have their child through Offred, surreptitiously through Nick as well. You've got this setup where the actual biological parents are like awkwardly forced into physical union so that two totally different individuals can have a kid. And I think this book reveals the scandal, I think it's the right word, like the scandal of what surrogacy and other fertility technologies do, like particularly with like egg donation, sperm donation. The technology hides from us today how scandalous and shameless that process is.
Because it's like they're not really having sex.
Yes. But like this shows that scenario, like this is the same thing happening here. Like, let's not kid ourselves. Like, I don't really see that much of a difference between today's fertility tech and the sexual situations in Gilead. I think it's wrong to separate persons from their own physical fruitfulness. Like, to separate lovemaking from baby making by purchasing someone else's seed. Like, if you wouldn't have sex with that man or with that woman, I don't think you should have their sexual seed mingling with yours. I'm with Mary Harrington on this. I think holistically, like, I don't think we should take ourselves apart and sell bits of ourselves to other people. Like, I think children have a right to come into existence from an act of profound personal union, not through a lab procedure in which money changed hands and in which the biological parents and or the gestating mother are excluded from the child's life. Like, the donation of gametes is a fundamentally different act from, say, blood donation or kidney donation. Right? Like, you give someone a kidney or a pint of blood and you're helping to sustain and lengthen the life of someone who already exists. But you donate eggs or sperm, or you rent out your womb, and you're creating a whole new human being, your child, whom you're choosing from the get-go to not parent. And that is really strange. You know, and all that to say there's value in the shameful awkwardness, like the fiction creation in Offred's recounting of the moment with Nick, because sex and procreation are not supposed to happen like this. I don't think. Like Rachel's plea in the Bible, give me children or I die, I think it can lead to some pretty dark things. So I know that may be a offensive opinion to some people, but like I get pretty uncomfortable with it.
It's a classic example, though, of the liberal paradigm where the good, the healthy, the correct, or sort of like comfortable outcome of these technologies always imputes an incredibly strong moral background to them that it then denies is there. Like, in the sense that, like, well, I think I've talked about how the Alabama decision about IVF is, like, incredibly bad theology.
Yeah. And
how, when IVF was first developed, how the Vatican came out and was like, no. Yeah. This is like, nope, line here. You already crossed it. Yeah. Don't even.
Yeah.
At the time, I remember just feeling how interesting it was that the line would be drawn there because the sort of non-doctrinal understanding was, as long as a child is conceived within marriage, it doesn't, is born to married parents, that's what they're interested in. Uh-huh. And it turns out that, like, really, you can see that opinion as sort of recognizing that it was never going to stop with giving infertile couples children. It was never going to stop there.
Because it's a market and there's needs.
Because there's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Imputing the sort of like moral guidance to these technologies is always in a way wishful thinking. Because there will be moral actors, but there will also be always immoral actors. Yes. And the technology doesn't care. The technology works no matter who uses it.
That's right.
And that's something that I think liberals have a really hard time understanding. That once a technology exists, sort of just creates around it a morality of acceptance. And the only way to not live in that world is to live in a world where every time something is created, you only think about it from that, like the Amish, when they decide, the Amish don't want to live in the dark ages, and they don't want to live off the government. So they have to compete in a modern economy.
Yes.
What a lot of them will do is they'll use like workarounds. Like they'll have a phone, but the phone will only be for business and it won't be in the house. It'll be like in a different...
Right. So their
special
culture
area.
Doesn't change.
Because they look at it not as the technology is evil, but they don't want the adoption of technology to alter the things they value about their way of life.
Right, because they recognize how intimately tied the technology is to the way of life and how new technology changes your way of life.
Yeah.
And I don't think we get that. I think our culture is more like, ooh, the latest new thing. Great.
Well, we've been taught that these things make us happy. And it takes us a long time
to make us
realize.
more efficient, which will make us
Well, in the case of IVF, I mean, it really is this idea. This technology gives you something you couldn't have without it. And it really is a dark desire. It can be a very dark desire. I mean, like, before all this, like, IVF things, like, you remember those stories in, like, the 80s about random women, like, stealing babies from the hospital nursery and all those kind of things?
Oh, gosh.
Right? Remember that? Desires to make the impossible possible. Like, make people do, in some circumstances, incredibly extreme, drastic things.
Yeah.
Because there is a lot to be said in a world where you look across the street and somebody could have something that you desperately want and can't have. And that is like a terrible feeling to live with your whole life, for instance, when it comes to things like infertility. So we've arrived at this place where, it doesn't matter what, hand-wavy theology, good, bad, neutral, otherwise you want to wave around it. Everyone now agrees that because we have this technology that can conceive children outside of a womb, that it's good. Everybody believes that now because the technology itself made it, you know what I'm saying? It was like inevitable. There was no way to have that technology and then not have people accept it as good.
Yeah. Except the Catholics. I think Catholics are the only ones
right,
who
but
don't.
that's doctrinal. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
Nobody's
yeah.
like inquiring like how your child was conceived. I mean, like, aren't there like no-go zones in Catholicism? I mean, do you confess that as a sin? I mean,
well, if someone in Catholicism did that, they should confess it. Who knows if they do? People are people, and they're going to do what they feel like in their situation. They feel that they want or need to do.
And you realize that these things, the technology perpetuates the need to render this technology acceptable. Because let's say you live in a group of ex-Catholics, not X as in form, but X number of Catholics, and 4 of the couples are infertile, and one of them goes and does IVF, you're basically making infertility no longer part of the natural world.
Right.
Because, like, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
So it's becoming more and more and more uncommon, and there's going to be, like, more and more the sense that this is, of course, what you do.
Yes.
There's this irresistibility about it.
This is the social contagion component of it as well.
Yes.
That's right. And enough people are doing it, then that creates a whole new plausibility structure and a whole new world and a whole new justification for why it's fine. And
it's this really important thing that I've been sort of thinking about a lot, is how, like, on all sides, the self-imposed limits of virtue are really intimately connected to the natural imposed limits of human capability. It's really a lot easier to say, don't terminate a pregnancy because of fetal anomaly, if you have no modern medicine to extend that life beyond what it's going to be.
Right, and if you're like, okay, the baby has an anomaly and they'll probably die in the first year of life.
Right, but that first year of life, nowadays, is a life completely medicalized to the nth degree.
We're going to be in massive medical debt. Our whole lives are going to.
We're going to have all these machines. We're going to be at endless hospitals. We're going to be in endless doctor. We're going to spend our whole there are kids who spend their entire short lives in the NICU.
Yeah, and you can see how that comes from valuing and dignifying every life, wanting to love and protect and preserve. But it's also the technology creates all these new problems and impositions and costs that would not have been there before.
Right.
And so
it changes what you're asked.
That's right.
Like, in a way that I don't think we've really we really have the capacity to grapple with.
Yeah.
IVF has gone from a technology of just allowing infertile married heterosexual couples to conceive to becoming this whole market of like designer babies, like, whether it's like crazy Russians ordering like 21 of them, or
remember
that?
Ah, yes, I do. Oh.
Or like random people adopting long frozen embryos, like snowflake babies.
Yes.
Also weird.
No.
How do you like find someone's frozen embryo? How could that be? Is like an embryo lost and found? How do you get permission to do that?
I don't know.
Oh
yeah.
I mean, it's creepy.
There's just a lot of weirdness.
It's easy to say in the abstract, oh yeah, these things are good, children are good, wanted children are good. Like, that's very easy to say in the abstract, and I think in the abstract that's probably true. But there's no such thing as 2 men having a child.
No.
So we're basically just saying that because we want to believe that, homosexuality is not disorder, it's not pathological, because we want to admit that someone can be a perfectly morally upstanding member of society and be gay. Mm-hmm. In our interest to say that, then we have to sort of, never talk about or never challenge any of the distinctions between the vastly overwhelming majority of humans who are heterosexual and this continuous but going to forever remain a minority position.
Right.
And it's weird because we're never going to tackle these issues unless we can get over some of these kinds of... If you take away the limiting factor that there was always a woman involved in the creation of a baby,
right?
If you take that away out of the social mix entirely, you're going to introduce things that nature didn't allow to happen, probably for a reason.
Right.
Like, there was a hedge on that.
That's right. And I think the same thing, like when you're saying, like, you take the woman away and then that was a necessary hedge. I also say you take the sex act away, and you replace it with people in lab coats and test tubes and other things like that. I don't think nature wants us. I mean, I would also say I don't think God wants us, but, like, I don't think that's not how nature recreates people.
No.
I think that's one of those limiting things. So it's like, just like where the technology that can, like, so extend life, to kind of a person who would otherwise probably just live a few hours, weeks, or days, or years, or whatever, like, at some point you go, like, I don't think we're supposed to be doing, like, tweaking it that much. I don't know. I don't think that makes me fundamentalist to say like women and sex should be involved in procreation. Like,
it's so basic.
I don't know. It's so basic. I don't know.
It's so basic. It's radical. I think that for women, no matter what the sort of happy outcome is for this sort of consumer, and in the case of these surrogacy reproductive services, it is absolutely a market. It's absolutely the consumer.
Yes. Yeah.
It is the same thing as, sex work is real work. If it's not happening to you, you bear no moral consequence for any of the things that happen. I mean, and good-hearted people are never thinking about the worst case scenario. They're never thinking about the pedophiles who order children.
Right.
They're never
thinking of the nice infertile couple down the street who finally got to have a baby, and aren't they so happy for them? And yeah, that's the thing. These technologies provide the opportunity for both the good people and the bad actors to take advantage.
You wonder if, like, by saying anyone can be a parent, anyone can order a baby, it's that sort of undercurrent, like that Schulman Firestone element of, like, full surrogacy now. Like, you wonder if there's some sort of, like, bottom line, wishful fantasy.
Right. Like, it's hard. We want to outsource it.
Well, of course, for now, you're only outsourcing it to other women.
Right.
Horror women. Desperate women.
Right.
Or mistakenly altruistic women.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important to say that, like, I think adoption is wonderful. I think adoption is a beautiful response of love in the face of a tragedy you did not cause.
Right?
This is so different. Surrogacy and fertility technologies are not adoption. They're like the creation of the trauma and the tragedy which you then purport to solve. It's like, no, you don't get to create it and then be the solution to it. Sad things happen, and if you want to respond very lovingly to the sad thing, then you can do that, but you don't like, I'm going to create the tragedy of a motherless child, and then I'm going to parent the child. It's like, no, you don't get to do that.
There's all sorts of horror stories about surrogate pregnancies being rejected. Like, the baby will be born, and then the surrogates won't take it. Like
I didn't think that would be legal. That very much is like a product. I'm gonna return my child.
Yeah,
that's terrible.
I don't want that. Like, I ordered a boy and a girl, and that's 2 boys on it. Or, like, there's so many stories of or like, birth defects or whatever. Just
like that. I mean, that's why I feel like this is part of why I think that keeping sex and pregnancy together is important, because then it has the inevitability. Like, every act of sex is a roll of the dice. You don't know if you're going to get a kid or not. You don't know what kid you're going to get. You're not picking anything. There's a good kind of like. You have to be hospitable. You have to be open to limits. You have to be open to reality.
You have to accept an incredible high degree of uncertainty, which I think one of the reasons that I did not want to be a parent, because I was like, that makes me too nervous. I can't go with that flow. Yeah. I'm too fearful of worst case scenarios.
Yeah. To be a parent and to be open to parenthood is to suffer.
Right.
Yes. Right. Because to love is to suffer.
Exactly. And the love of a child is that special thing where your heart is literally walking around the world without you. That's right. And it's so hard to let them suffer and have their experiences.
Right.
And not always intervene and protect and circumvent and clear the way. Yeah. I mean, you can read some of these dude bros that are on about like how every pregnancy will be artificially created in 10 years. Just like these so crazy kinds of attitudes. They have no concept of, what it means to replace a system that's like governed by natural idiosyncrasies and natural limits. Yes. With something that's governed by money and resources and market, and it's gross. I mean, and yet it's so weird because we're in this place where, on the one hand, there's not a lot of resistance coming from traditionalism about this, as we can see in the IVF thing. Oh, right. And there's also not a lot of sense on the far left that any of this is dangerous for women. And this is part of what radical feminism really needs to be about, is like finding these constituencies who see correctly on this issue, who are not right used to traditionally being in the in the same group. Yeah. Like really coming to speak honestly about these things and saying, it's not bigoted to talk about the differences between fertile people and infertile people, or homosexuals and heterosexuals in that regard. It's not bigoted. It's like reality. Yeah. And I think there's a common ground that religious and non-religious people can talk about it, and we just, in terms of nature, or like natural limits. Well, like I don't have to be like, well, the Pope said blah blah. Like I don't need to talk about that at all. Like I could just talk about in terms of
evolution and the nature of the body and the evolution of the family and mammalian maternal child bonding and like all, like I can talk about it totally in those terms and we can come to agreement and there's no like divine law coming in anywhere.
And it's
like,
not even really so much moral as it is, what is the trade-off?
Mm-hmm.
Forget the fact that like sometimes the surrogates die. Forget the fact that like even having your eggs harvested can be incredibly, you can lose your own fertility trying to do that. You can have a stroke. This is going to be, it's one of those things where like the majority of the people are probably going to get some benefit from it, but what do you do about that long tail where they lose, you know?
Are those sacrifices worthwhile?
When should we be leading people into a society where I think there's a certain flavor to the injustice of technology that is different from the injustice of the natural world?
Yes, because the injustice of technology is always run by other people. Or the injustice of the natural world is like, well, that was a tsunami. That was not anybody in particular's fault. So we're all in this together. But whenever it's technology, it's one human controlling other humans through it. And so, yes, someone literally is screwing you over. There's a someone behind there.
And
but
also,
not with natural disasters.
I think there's just the range of effects. If you, growing up in like, you know, the oldie-timey times, and you happen to be infertile, like, there were probably plenty of other kids, there were probably plenty of children around that you could sort of, like, lives you could be involved in.
That's
because
right.
you probably had a lot of siblings.
You could have maternal
And they
expression.
probably had a lot of kids.
Right. Yeah,
So
you
it's
can
like,
be an aunt, you can be, you know, a great aunt, you can be involved with your cousin's kids or whatever. There'd be other ways.
Like, in a way, what's happening here is if you don't have your own, you have nothing. And that's part of this sort of individualization of it. I feel that way. I think about that a lot. I feel like, you know, if there were more children, if there were more, I feel like if we hadn't lost so much of that sort of, you know, larger family culture, like even people without, like, I don't think it's, like, even people who didn't have kids wouldn't feel so isolated from the world of people who did have kids because there would just be more overlap. Right.
You'd be helping out, you'd be involved.
Well, no, people just have to live closer. I mean, ultimately.
Right, and that's and there's so many reasons why we live so separate. That's so hard for me. I mean, my parents are way up in one state, my brother and his family and kids are in another, and we're all just, we love getting together, but I have a lot of, if only we could, like, be living in the same town.
On a compound.
Be on the same street.
A family compound.
A family farm.
I mean, you have to wonder, why did we dismantle all that?
Personal choice, man. Personal choice. Gotta have options. Gotta go to college. Gotta go.
I wonder if it was just one of those things where people just really didn't see the trade-offs they were preparing themselves. They were like, they just really didn't. They saw really only the positive side.
Yeah.
Like,
and also,
with
because
IVF.
family can be so annoying. You know, like, family can be so limiting. Like, when you're around them all the time, you're like, oh, if only I could get away, you know, and then, like, then you get away and you're like, oh my gosh, all the rest of us are so sad and lonely and have no support. You know, it's like they didn't know what they didn't know, and no one had ever really done it before. Right.
No, I think there's this thing where, like, what kept people together was sheer necessity. I mean, we've talked about this, how, like, do we really think that the reason motherhood works is because it was largely non-optional? Like, that's the question I've been asking myself. If we allow women to choose, like, maybe if there is too much control, it doesn't work.
Yeah, and I mean, and I said before to you, like, I feel so grateful to have twins because I got in a fourth, and I don't know if my husband and I would have had sort of the wisdom and the fortitude to choose number 4.
Right.
And I'm so glad we have 4.
It's 9 more months.
Oh, the
it's
money,
it's really
all the
18
things.
more months because you got to recover from the last one.
And, like, I have a friend who had, like, a surprise number 5, and, like, at the time I was like, oh my gosh, that's so much. Wow, that's a lot. And, like, my husband and I look back on that now, we're both kind of like, oh man, I wish we'd had number 5. But we did, you know, but when you have tight resources, you're like, oh, okay. You know, and that was a choice we didn't know we were making at the time.
Right.
But that's how things are now. Like, you have to opt in to children in a way that people never had to. And it's
Although that's funny to say that because I was reading this thing about this, I was reading a thing by a writer and she's saying how, like, she got married and she got surprised by that she got pregnant. I'm like, am I missing something here? If you're married and you're having sex, you are not allowed to be surprised by getting pregnant.
Yeah.
Period.
Maybe we shouldn't use the term surprise babies anymore.
But I mean, like, she's like, oh, I'm surprised. Like, I was hoping, like, I was thinking we would have, you know, babies in a few years after this and this. And I'm like, were you really thinking that hard? I mean, like, I don't know where that comes from. Do you think people just have like this? Do you think women just have this like really kind of like they just haven't been around enough people having random like just making baby? They just haven't been around to like. It's too mysterious.
I think people probably use contraception and don't realize that they all have failure rates, and that nature finds a way. I think they use, we're using one form of contraception or another. Of course, that means we won't be having a baby until we stop using it. Like, I don't think people realize.
Ah, okay.
That's my guess.
Okay. Yeah. All right, so they're like...
It's not in the 5-year plan.
Because I sort of feel like when I read things like that, like, I guess when somebody says that, I expect them to be like, we were using birth control, but we didn't do very well. We failed. Like, I don't expect, like, maybe they're just not saying that because that would be embarrassing. Because I sort of feel like they're saying, like, oh, we just thought we'd have a lot of sex, but we wouldn't get pregnant for a couple of years. And I'm like, who thinks that? Or think that, but don't admit that out loud.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe that is sort of like the thing, though. Like, maybe it's all part of this mindset that we now live in this mindset where we actually think that we can plan it.
Right.
Like, we kind of have to, and we think it, and then when we don't,
right,
we get surprised by something that would never have been considered a surprise.
Right. And I think that's why infertility also feels like such an affront, because it's like, but we made a plan. We were going to have kids because just like the surprise baby is like the affront to your sense of control of your own life. The baby that doesn't come is like how can that be? This is not what I hoped and planned for. And it's just the irony and the pain of that. Like, so many people end up having like a child they didn't plan for,
right?
And it's difficult. And then so many people are like desperately hoping and planning for a child and don't have one. It's like,
and
that's life.
In our culture, the solution is there's a product for that.
Yeah.
But in the previous culture, there was the only compensations for that were social. They were sociological,
right?
So to speak,
rather than technological ones.
Yeah.
And I think the cultural relational solutions are going to be, in the long run, wiser and have fewer bad side effects.
Fewer trade-offs. And are probably better for our consciences and our connections with each other and our interdependence than the technological market route, which will hype up we do have control. We can spend money to fix this. I don't have to cope with limits by getting into different kinds of relationships with other people. It's like, no, I can pay for this. I'm going to crack this code. I'm going to solve this problem. It's like, some things are not problems to be solved. They're like realities to bear in community with other people. Right. And it's like you actually are cutting off the possibility of certain kinds of growth through suffering and connections with other people. You will not have those because you've gone a technological route. That is so you're important. A different kind of person than you would have been. And it narrows this band of our suffering to a way that we can no longer understand our suffering to be existential and only solvable by communing with others. Right. Some sufferings are existential and they're meant to make you go, like, look up. Like I'm at the end. I've hit the end of my rope. I can't. It's not fixable. Go on. Yeah. Right. And if you never hit if technology is sort of doing away with all of these formerly existential, like, infertility, there's a reason that there has to be a fundamental reason why that story is so central. I know. To the beginning of the Old Testament. And the infertile woman is the symbol throughout the whole Bible. It's like it's just not a coincidence. Right. It's not a coincidence. Yeah. And yeah. So if we whittle down these things about if it's never ever, we've literally created a world in which we are unwriting that story of the miracle of being able to have a child. We're literally writing a world in which that is not. That won't be a miracle. It's a procedure you pay for. It's a commodity. Yeah. Isn't that weird? You have to think that when that story was written and enshrined in this way, in this cultural artifact that the Old Testament was, in the time that it was, not just sort of written but rewritten, compiled, just the whole sort of making of the Bible period, which is an incredible lengthy period of time. You have to imagine those stories. They were counting on this assumption that story would never lose its resonance. That's right. Because it would never be a thing that a human could do to fix that. It would only ever be a miracle. Right. the boundaries of what was possible, how humans worked, was like known, understood, explored, and all exceptions were divine. We don't live in that world anymore.
No.
And we're probably, a lot of our unhappiness might be because we do not live in that world anymore.
Yeah, we traded one kind of unhappiness for a different kind.
I mean, you can almost imagine a society in the future that can't relate to that narrative.
Right.
Because they just don't even understand. I mean, we're getting to that point now where, you see that you can watch some of these, like, surrogates give birth. Like, like some random Ukrainian woman, like, bearing a baby for some Chinese couple, and they just, like, it just comes out of her womb and they just take it away.
Really?
Like, she's not even allowed to, like, she doesn't even look at it. Like, partly that's because, like, if she's done it before, she knows it's easier if you don't.
Oh,
but it's like...
Oh, so terrible. It's so terrible.
I mean, that's not a story that would be recognizable from this sort of Old Testament, Old World. Like,
no.
It's a new narrative.
Yeah.
It's a brave new world.
It's a brave new world. Maybe we should close on that.
So,
oh, man.
That's what we think. But we come pre-canceled, so we're good. Don't worry about us.
Well, what do you think? Let us know in the comments.
Do I turn the comments on?
I don't know.
Make sure to turn the comments on.
All right. Well, thanks, George.
Thanks, Acton.
Thanks for joining us, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.